It's the 1980s, and rally racing is at its peak. Innovative cars, fearless drivers, and die-hard fans, standing so close they could almost touch the cars. A blur of color screams past at 200 kilometers per hour, with nothing but a crowd of spectators as its guardrails. No one doubted whether disaster would strike. They just didn't know when. They called it the golden era of rallying, but it was also the most dangerous period motorsport had ever seen. The cars were too fast, the rules were too loose, and by 1986, it had gone too far. So, how do you end up with a start line of tinderboxes waiting to explode? This was probably the sort of question that the FIA, Rally's governing body, asked itself when drafting the infamous Group B regulations at the start of the 1980s. The category started out as a replacement of Groups 4 and 5, which were dedicated to modified Grand Touring and Touring prototype cars, with the goal of making rally more flexible and enticing for manufacturers. By taking the back seat, the FIA had essentially given manufacturers the green flag to create a group of modified cars far more dangerous than anything we'd see nowadays. To be fair to the rulemakers, the 80s was generally a wild time to be alive. It was not uncommon to go to an amusement park, hop onto a roller coaster with no safety harness, buy a pack of smokes for the folks, and go back to a home doused in asbestos. In this environment, they didn't see anything wrong with allowing teams to create cars that were really light, extremely powerful, and used very experimental technology. In fact, the FIA didn't see the point in introducing too many rules at all. Of course, there were a few basic requirements. The car had to have 2 seats and a closed roof. They also had to comply with minimum race weight and a maximum tire width. But beyond that, the road was clear for experimentation and innovation. For example, the lack of restrictions on how much turbo boost a manufacturer could introduce led to some cars during the later years exceeding well over 500 horsepower. The homologation standards were lax too. While Group A manufacturers had to produce 5,000 units to be eligible, Group B teams needed only a mere 200 over the span of 12 months. Only the basic layout and shape of the street legal version had to match. For the first year, Group 4 and 5 cars were also allowed to compete. Then, the FIA sweetened the deal for manufacturers even further, guaranteeing that the regulations would be in effect at least until 1987 and couldn't be canceled with a shorter than 2-year notice. It worked like a charm, and teams poured in. Still, there was one glaring factor to consider: costs. Creating even 200 homologation models of modified vehicles requires a significant investment, and the FIA pushed hard for teams to explore the limits of engineering. So, Group B ended up being limited only to factory teams that had proven themselves over the years. As a result, this rally quickly became about more than simply going from point A to point B as fast as possible. It became more about money, power, and prestige, where engineers and car makers would go to any length for bragging rights. The biggest names in motorsport history, including Lancia, Renault, Peugeot, Ford, and Audi, threw their hats into the ring, hoping to create a car that wouldn't just set fast times, but also stuff out the competition and show the world what they were truly made of. Personal safety be damned. And, over 30 years later, it's clear that they delivered. The 1980s were the first time the world was introduced to 4-wheel-driven rally cars, which, up until that point, was a technology reserved for heavy-duty trucks. Soon after Audi unveiled the Quattro, other teams followed suit, and by the end of the decade, most had their own 4-wheel drive variants. In fact, it took only a few years for Peugeot to one-up Audi and master the concept. The manufacturer's iconic 205 Turbo 16, with an intelligent 4-wheel drive system, allowed 75% of the power to go to the rear, allowing for more control, maneuverability, and speed. Similarly, teams experimented heavily with lightweight components in order to make the most of the minimal weight requirements. Prior to the Corsica race in 1983, Opel unveiled the Manta 400, which used Kevlar for various parts of the hood to the spoiler. Coupled with lightweight headlight holders, the team was able to drop 80 kilograms of the total weight and made the car a respectable competitor on track. But a few years later, by the time Ford unveiled the RS200 and Lancia came out with the Delta S4, the Opel may as well have been a cargo truck, seeing as it had suddenly become one of the heaviest cars on the track. There was also immense experimentation under the hood. Since only 200 models were required, and the cost wasn't that much of an issue for big manufacturers, teams also freely experimented with mid-engine layouts. Lancia, for example, greatly benefited from the improved weight balance and handling of its mid-mounted 2-liter 4-cylinder engine, winning the 1985 season and fetching 3 wins the following year. The next few years saw more groundbreaking innovations. Spectators triple in size, and Group B catapult to world fame. Teams saw this category as not just a place to show off their creations, but also to mold the future of automobile manufacturing altogether. Little did they realize just how volatile this cocktail they were creating would be. Over time, cars got more powerful and dangerous, and a palpable air of risk hung over the rally track. The cars of Group B were slowly reaching their peak, becoming so fast and unstable that even legendary drivers like Valtteri Röhrl and Ari Vatanen could barely control them. What started as a display of engineering prowess and ambition quickly morphed into a Hunger Games-like situation for teams, where a lack of creativity would spell disaster, and a single misstep would lead to immense death and destruction. It's often said that the most profound changes emerge from sudden disruptions. Whether it's a shift in routine or an unexpected break from the norm, these disruptions force us to reevaluate and adapt. In a similar vein, the Group B regulations may contradict everything we know about modern-day racing standards, but they were the exact disruption teams needed to produce some of the most legendary cars to grace the sport. These machines weren't just designed to win, they were built to intimidate, dominate, and leave a lasting impression. From the innovative Audi Quattro to the blistering Peugeot 205 Turbo 16, each car carved out its own niche in history, and easily features in multiple lists of the top rally cars of all time, despite their overwhelming lack of safety gear. The era began with the Audi Quattro essentially changing the rallying landscape by introducing its revolution on 4 wheels. This beast, with its 2.1-liter turbocharged 5-cylinder engine that produced 320 bhp at 3,500 RPM, absolutely tore up the track in the early years of the era. Audi won manufacturer titles in 1982 and 1984, with the Quattro piloted by drivers champions like Hannu Mikkola and Stig Blomqvist, and French driver Michel Mouton. Then came the Peugeot 205 Turbo 16, a car that might as well have been a weapon on wheels. The 205 T16 was equipped with a 1.8-liter turbocharged 4-cylinder engine that pushed out around 350 horsepower and allowed it to reach a top speed of 130 miles per hour. What really set this car apart was its clever 4-wheel drive system that dynamically shifted power to the rear wheels, providing control over any surface. Its lightweight construction, paired with its power and agility, made it one of the most feared cars in Group B. Piloted by the likes of Ari Vatanen, the Peugeot 205 Turbo 16 was the embodiment of what Group B was all about: raw, unfiltered speed. It won a total of 16 rallies over the years, as well as the 1985 and 1986 Constructors' titles. Each of these cars was incredibly powerful. Each was as light as the car those sizes could possibly be, and there were no safety cages. This was absolutely a recipe for disaster. But then the Lancia Delta S4 came along, and we were reminded again of how much good came out of these regulations. This engineering masterpiece combined the raw power of a turbocharged engine with precision handling. It was the team's first follow-up to the 037, which remains the last rear-wheel drive car to have won a rally. The Delta S4, meanwhile, came ready to take things up a notch. The mid-mounted 1.8-liter supercharged and turbocharged 4-cylinder engine produced a shocking 500 horsepower and could hit a top speed of around 137 miles per hour. It was the first car to introduce the revolutionary concept of twin charging and is considered the most technologically advanced vehicle of the group. What made the Delta S4 truly special was its blend of raw power and razor-sharp handling, thanks to its mid-engine layout and advanced suspension system. This was a car that would go 0 to 60 miles per hour in 2.5 seconds. On gravel, in the 1980s. You'd have to be really crazy to want to get into one of these and drive it all full throttle. It was truly incredible. Driven by rally legends like Valtteri Röhrl, the Lancia Delta S4 became the symbol of Group B's spirit, proving that control and chaos can coexist in harmony. Ford's RS200 and Opel's Manta 400 were also key players in this high-octane era. The Ford RS200 was a mid-engine marvel, powered by a turbocharged 1.8-liter engine capable of producing over 450 horsepower and hitting a top speed of 130 miles per hour. But that's not all that makes it so memorable. This Ford also has the distinction of being voted one of the most attractive cars of the time, with the team taking great measures to ensure that the form and function of the car truly matched. The Manta 400's 2.4-liter four-cylinder engine, on the other hand, produced a more modest 250 horsepower, but to make up for it, it had a lightweight frame that made it a fierce competitor. But that's not all. During the Group B regulations, we saw cars like the Renault 5 Turbo conquer tarmac, and the MG Metro 6R4 claim 8 fastest stage times in 1984, despite neither really being serious contenders for any titles. Over 5 years, these gravity-defying machines captured the essence of Group B perfectly. Masterful innovation meets reckless design, and it wouldn't be too long before drivers started reeling from the effects. The aerodynamics and powerful engines made Group B cars so fast that many suffered from tunnel vision and needed spinal decompression between stages. This is not to say that the drivers of the time were soft or less equipped to tame these incredible beasts. The Group B era wasn't just defined by the cars, but also by the group of fearless and audacious drivers who took them to their limits, and often beyond. One of the most well-known names on this list is Ari Vatanen, whose incredible talent behind the wheels of the Peugeot's 205 Turbo 16 makes him one of the most well-known racing drivers of all time. One of his most memorable outings is probably the 1985 Monte Carlo Rally, which saw him claw back a victory after suffering an 8-minute time penalty. To make things more impressive, he clinched this win while driving his ticking time bomb up a snowy mountain and against the previous 5-time winner, Walter Rührl. Rührl, meanwhile, was a legend in his own right, and is a name that's almost synonymous with Group B. Since the regulations were first announced, Rührl was the only driver who had the pleasure of racing an Opel, a Lancia, and the Audi Quattro. After sealing the first Group B championship with the Opel Ascona 400 in 1982, he secured multiple wins over the years, including incredible performances in the 1984 Monte Carlo and 1985 Rally Sanremo rallies. In fact, even when Group B was scrapped, Rührl continued to push the limits, setting a record time at the Pikes Peak International Hill Climb in 1987 and dethroning Vatanen's breathtaking 1983 attempt. Simultaneously, French driver Michèle Mouton made a name for herself as the most successful woman in rally history after winning 3 races in 1982. In fact, Mouton's run was so incredible that she could have won the championship that year. However, just before the final race, Mouton was dealt an immense blow. She was informed just before the race that her father had died, a fact she kept between her and her co-driver. Incredibly, during the race, she managed to pull off an unassailable lead before a failed gearbox eventually put an end to her title ambitions. Her second-place finish was, however, enough to secure her as one of the most admired figures in the sport. Toivonen's tragic death, of course, is one that still resonates when discussing safety standards in motorsport. But prior to the horrific accident, the Finnish driver had already proven to be one of the most talented drivers of his generation, pulling off a dominant victory at the 1986 season-opening Monte Carlo Rally, which was won by his father exactly 20 years prior. When he asked what it felt like to drive a Group B car at top speed, he said it was like sitting on a box of TNT, igniting it, and trying to control the explosion. Unfortunately, this would end up being a prophetic quote, as Toivonen lost his life in a crash in Corsica, which, as we'll soon see, was one of the defining moments of Group B. While it's no surprise that the Finns are great in the snow, Group B also gave us the tarmac specialist Finnish driver, Markku Alén, who led a Lancia 1-2-3-4 at Corsica in 1983. And the list goes on. Names like Stig Blomqvist, Jean-Claude Androuet, and Timo Salonen regularly setting the timesheets on fire, and navigating some incredibly rough conditions to give the fans what they wanted. In fact, these drivers weren't just racers. They were symbols of bravery, skill, and the unrelenting pursuit of perfection. The Group B era was as much about them as it was about the cars, with each professional pushing themselves and their machines to the absolute limit, forever etching their names in the sport's legendary chronicles. Now, as if incredibly fast cars, narrow streets, few safety requirements, and speed-hungry pilots weren't enough, the FIA's biggest issue wasn't the rally itself, but the fans. Group B had achieved an almost cult-like status among its fans, who were so hopped on adrenaline that safety took a clear back seat. We've all seen the videos. These spectators didn't just politely gather to watch the rallies behind barricades, they would become a part of the action, often walking onto the track and jumping out of the way at the last second in an attempt to get closer to their heroes. In Portugal, it was estimated that 4% of the entire population attended Group B rallies, making it almost as popular as football. But as the size of the crowds grew, fans became even more boisterous and reckless. Some reports suggest that in some countries, jumping out of the way of a rally car had become a national pastime, while fans who managed to actually touch cars were elevated to hero status. Both Lancia and Peugeot mechanics said later that they had found blood, hair, and even severed fingers stuck in the wings and ducts of their cars following collisions with fans. To make matters worse, many fans would throw things at the drivers and place obstacles on the road for their 15 minutes of fame. Imagine approaching a turn at over 100 miles per hour and being expected to hit the apex while carefully avoiding the hundreds of human bodies and objects strewn across the tracks. It's this exact fear that cements the Group B era as possibly the most chaotic, unorganized, and outright dangerous period of any sport since the gladiator games. All through the years, organizers insisted that controlling the entire length of the stage was impossible, and it makes sense to a certain degree. This isn't a Formula 1 circuit where you can have fans sit in controlled stands surrounded by safety features. Rallies are held in thick forests, over vast deserts, and snowy mountains, making the tracks incredibly difficult to regulate. Of course, today we have much stricter rules in place, such as dedicated marshals and designated viewing areas. But back then, the only thing that could really secure the spectators' safety was themselves. The first big tragedy of Group B, however, had nothing to do with spectators at all. In 1985, a Lancia 037 piloted by Attilio Bettega and co-driver Maurizio Parisino slid off and slammed into a tree, an impact that saw the car tear apart. Parisino, who wasn't injured in the incident, went on the streets to flag incoming cars, but it took 20 minutes for an ambulance to arrive, by which point Bettega was declared dead. The following year, another tragic incident made the FIA reflect, this time not just about the safety of its drivers, but also about the fans of the sport. This was during the 1986 Portugal Rally, when Joaquim Santos lost control of his Ford RS200 and plowed into a crowd of spectators. It caused 31 injuries and 3 deaths and led to all major teams withdrawing from the event. Then, shortly after, it all came to a head. A month later, Group B was rocked by a third devastating accident, the tragic deaths of Toivonen and co-driver Sergio Cresto, who careened off the road at the Rally of Corsica. By this point, the reality was undeniable. The combination of extreme car power, fan proximity, and the lack of safety standards had produced incredible cars and years of thrilling racing, but it also proven to be a recipe for disaster. The deaths also ended up being the final blow, with the FIA immediately banning Group B cars from 1987. And that would officially spell the end of the unofficial golden era of racing. Teams moved on to other categories, while drivers set out to chase new titles over less challenging tracks. Engineers went back to poring over the regulations, and turbochargers were placed under strict restrictions. Still, for over 30 years, Group B has captured imaginations and has been used as both a warning and a reminder for future generations about what happens when the FIA decides to throw the rulebook in the trash and give the fans what they truly want.